Welcome back to Season 5 of the True Blue Conversations podcast with your host, Adam Bloom. G'day, podcasters. Before we get underway with True Blue Conversations, just wanted to give a huge shout out to our friend and sponsor, the Warrior U podcast, hosted by Bram Connolly. Bram is a former Special Forces commander, best-selling author, popular podcast host, and human optimization pioneer. He has an authentic style and the unique ability to not only motivate, but also take people on a journey of self-discovery. Through the Warrior U podcast, Bram interviews guests in a bid to explore all things human optimization, resilience, leadership, and coffee. His book, The Commando Way, a Special Forces Commander's Lessons for Life, Leadership and Success, is available now on amazon.com.au. So from Adam Bloom and all of us here at True Blue Conversations, a big shout out to the Warrior U podcast, Bram Connolly, and his new book, The Commando Way, out now.
G'day, welcome back to True Blue Conversations. Today, I'm coming to you live from the Australian War Memorial in Canberra, and I've got a very, very special guest today. This man has done it all, and he is someone that I have wanted to get on the podcast for a very, very long time, and when you hear his story, you'll understand why. Now, today, I'm joined by former Special Forces, SASR, Brigadier Dan Fortune, retired, Distinguished Service Cross and Bar. Now, Dan served for 42 plus years in the Australian Army, deployed on many, many occasions, and he's joined us today to talk about his service, his experiences, and his life after service. Now, this is Dan's story, and this podcast may be controversial to some, but this is Dan's story. Dan, it's an absolute honour and a privilege to have you on True Blue Conversations. Welcome to the show, mate.
Thanks, Adam. It's a huge privilege to be here with you. Very humbled, and at the outset, congratulations on your book and what you're doing, mate. I'm a huge admirer and much respect, so thank you for what you're doing and bringing veteran stories to your listeners.
Thanks, Dan. Mate, as I said, it's a privilege to have you on. And Dan, before we get into...
I'm a bit nervous. It's my first ever podcast, mate. So I hope I don't fumble my way through this too badly.
You'll be fine, mate. You'll be fine. It's just a generalised
Don't worry,
chat.
I can fig jam. I'll turn that into an art form, so I'll do my best, mate. I'll just take a while to get warmed up.
No, that's all right, mate. So before we get into Dan and the soldier, let's go back to a young Dan. And what was life like as a young fella? How were you at school? Do you have any brothers and sisters? And did you play any sport?
Born and bred in Perth, WA, 63 December, born on the same day as my oldest brother, but 2 years apart. Story there that I've put on a LinkedIn post I won't bore you with today. And a younger sister. So 2 siblings, mum's still alive in Perth. My sister and her partner live in Perth. And there's an interesting link with the regiment right now. Schoolboy, very lucky to go through the state school system in WA at the time. Working class around Riverton, Rossmoyne. Rossmoyne High School is very sought after now. I was just lucky to be in the inflow area. Working class, out of suburban Perth in the day. I played Aussie rules and cricket. I was a cricket tragic, and my Aussie rules career was what I didn't have in speed. I made up for with my lack of height. But, I loved playing sport, but I was modestly useful at it. And then I joined the Army very early.
So, for you, Dan, did any of your family members serve before you, or were you the first?
No, I have some pedigree that I'm aware of. My dad was in the Nashos, and I think in many ways missed his calling to somewhat. I think he was a natural soldier because his DNA was from his father, my namesake, Daniel Fortune, who was in the Irish Army, then joined the RAF as a 31-year-old, was killed in an air crash. I think it was a Hampton bomber or a Wellington in Work Up to go into Lancaster to be killed over the air war against Germany. Yep. So he was killed as a flight sergeant air gunner in an air crash in 1944. That's my granddad. My father was orphaned, so that's the military pedigree. And it was Irish Army, and then Dad was in the Army, Cameron Highlanders as an ASHO. and did his CMF time,
Mm-hmm.
and really loved it. And that was the gift I was sort of blessed with about my calling to serve, I guess, if that sounds a bit weird, but
No,
well, not
it
corny,
doesn't.
but that was just into my DNA. Yeah.
So, what was the main draw card for you to join the army in 1981? And at that time, Dan, we were a peacetime army. There wasn't a lot happening. And what drew you to join in 1981?
Well, yeah, I think I was just very lucky that I'd always wanted to be a soldier, and I played soldiers as a young fella. It was just, that's how my safe little space was. In many ways, through my early childhood, that was my thing. So that was never really in question. I had other options. I did year 12, did okay at school, had the academics to go to uni, was accepted into, I think it was just to be WA Institute of Technology, now Curtin. But it was never really any question in my mind, because I left school in the November of 1980, year 12 or 5th year it was then, I think we used to call it. I just turned 17. Mum and Dad had to consent, they did. Put the paperwork into January, and I was all of a sudden whammo. It's like a bit of the dog who cut the car, you know. Got the letter and away I went in February of that next year. So the idea of a peacetime army, it wasn't really in my consciousness. I just wanted to join the army.
Yeah, right.
And the reality of what that meant and the operational context and what all that meant, you know, I was a boy and a bit of an adventure. No real sense of that, to be honest, when I think back now. And then I certainly wasn't.
Yep. So explain to me, like, now we've got the internet nowadays, Dan, and 1901, you make the phone call. Talk me through the process back in 1981.
Well, to what I can remember, and without jumping ahead too far, when I was CO Duntree, one of the things you used to say to people when the staff cadets, when they'd start at the beginning of their ab initio, is welcome and thank you for fighting your way through the recruiting process. Despite their best efforts, you made it here. And sadly, that's the case. But I didn't sense that, to be honest, in my own journey. I remember going remember the recruiting ads it's a bloody miracle, you know, breakfast like back at Grandma's at Kempsey. I vividly remember that sort of jingoistic advertising. And you physically went into the recruiting centre in St George's Terrace, Perth. There was a senior NCO there in his polys, and I found myself in a medical. I did the battery of testing, and I was at the other end of a letter. So that's sort of how it felt.
Yeah, right.
In that time frame, and because I started at Kapooka in 17 Feb 81, and 17 Feb, and I think I signed in mid January.
Yeah, right.
And just like walked up and said, "Hey, can I join the army?"
Yeah, right. And that was it.
And he weren't corps enlisted. It was just I was offered the RMC option because I had the education.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, but my father had suggested I should think about that.
Mm-hmm.
The dad was working class, not well educated, you know. That's just the class of the world he came from.
Yep.
And he said, why don't you go to Duntree? And I asked, but my heart was in. I want to be a soldier.
Yep.
So, yeah.
So you join up, and then it's a rapid rate to join up, and you get to Kapooka. Now, tell me about your memories of Kapooka. And was it a shock and awe when you got there?
Oh, yeah, very homesick. Massive culture shock, all of those things. I think I was lucky that the army of the day, I felt safe. It was quite confronting and scary, but it was a boy in a man's world and learning to live away from home and all of those. So my main struggle was in myself and managing my world views. My maturity was sort of not necessarily where it needed to be to deal with what was going on. Mm-hmm. Like for example, when I got sick, you know, I wanted to sook and have a bit of cuddle with Mum. You know, there wasn't a lot of cuddling in Kapooka at week 3. So that taught me to just man up in some ways. Yep. That's my memories. It was pretty tough, but at the same time, I was a muppet, complete muppet. But I fumbled out the other end of it. You know, 11 Platoon B Company. And formative experiences, you know, Corporal Smith, these iconic figures, I can still see them now. My section commander, my first platoon commander, you know, not a guy I would emulate and would think of, but I saw what I wouldn't want to emulate in the future there, and that's okay too, because not everyone gets it right. I later spoke to that guy, and we sort of squared that circle. But
because at that time too, did you have a lot of Vietnam veterans that were
There
your trainers?
were. Yep, absolutely. It was. Well, I think now back, if I think 10 years after my last trip to Afghan, that's so present. If you think your first trip was early 2000, so yes, there was an echo of the Vietnam Army, definitely. But it was in its transition state because the Great Peace hadn't sort of come upon us; it was moving into it.
Yep.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
The DIB thing, it was a Liberal government. I think Jim Killen was the Prime Minister, was the Defence Minister. So we hadn't got DOA formalised under the Hawke Keating DOA maritime strategy that became the doctrine from then. So it was pre that.
Yep.
If I look back now, it meant nothing to me then. Does that answer? I think
Yeah,
it helps
it does. No,
in
it
that
does.
context.
It does. And how long was Kapooka back then for
12 weeks.
12 weeks, yeah.
Yeah, and you did your T's, OETs, and you had to challenge, and then Mum and Dad came over, and it was one of my proudest moments, the graduation. They've still got a video of that. It was just classic, homespun, doing the ropes and all that sort of stuff. It was cheesy gold. And I've had the opportunity to go back to Kapooka when one of my nephews graduated, and it's just home of the soldier. Wonderful memories. Yeah.
So you finish and back then were you allocated right?
My preferences were infantry.
Yep.
Luckily, I was like that. Yeah, nowhere else suitable. I think I had the general aptitude for the other corps.
Yes.
But I asked for and was sent to infantry. As a number of us were.
Yep.
I was really, really happy. Understanding I was just 17 and a bit.
Yep.
And Singo was a really particularly formative experience for me.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about Singleton.
Well, I got charged at Singo and was put in detention, and 14 days of confined to barracks back in. This was pre DFDA, the old military law. It was tough. Field punishment, doubling around the parade ground, battalion orderly sergeant playing leaps from depot company down to BHQ. I was presented to the commandant, who was the then Colonel Hammett, who was a veteran from the Battle of Coral.
Okay.
The now Colonel Hammett's dad.
Yeah, right.
And he taught me a lesson in compassion, because he didn't put me in detention. He gave me 14 days CB. And the betting was I'd be put in slammer. But I was a minor. So the fact that I was in detention waiting... but I was a minor. But I did 14 days CB. And, it taught me a lot about soldiering. I've never been charged since in my 42-year career. So I learnt my lesson hard.
So was that the toughest time, you reckon?
Yeah, one of them, absolutely, yeah. I was in the locker, very homesick, cold winter, Singo. I was a muppet. Yeah. Again, I was a complete Billy Lid out in the field. I struggled with any sort of basic competence in the bush. The bush was hard for me. It was part of the reason why, without digressing too much, I got charged. I was on a work party on duties, and I tried to knock off 4 tent pegs and a hexi stove, so I could have 2 hexi stoves so I could brew up at the same time, because I was so slow and useless in morning routine. So that's the context, and I got busted trying to knock it off from the Q store. So you can imagine what a muppet I was. And the best way I conclude with my Singo story is the same story I gave to the Chief of Army, who was a classmate of mine from Dundrein, General Simon Stewart. Hugely respect Simon as a brilliant soldier and the right guy to lead the army right now, without question. Nod to you, mate. But the story I told was, at the end of Singleton, you do exercise hardcore, where everyone in the section is allocated a role, and the section commander clearly, and you go into mission profiles, and it's a big test to get your Green Beret. And the best of the soldiers in the section is typically the 2IC, and the most capable bush fieldcraft is Ford Scout, and the strongest, toughest is in the gun group. And you can imagine what job Private Fortune got? Number 7 rifleman. Arsenal that far back, mate. So I was sprouting around the platoon harbour going, hey, guess what job I got? Number 7 rifleman. How good am I going? So that's what I remember as thinking.
So you...
there was also about a very difficult incident. I should touch on it for a couple of reasons. We then became the firepower demo platoon down at the firepower demo. And you've got to remember, this is the early 80s firepower demo. The Leopards had just come into service. So it's a wonderful experience as a soldier to see combined arms down the range there, and they've turned the Chongjus, and they've been part of Army's history for a long time. I was there in 1981 when they used to do them, and the tanks were new, and we had Mirages bombing in.
Yeah, right.
And it was a fascinating example, because we were just the fire support platoon. But there was this really, really a bad incident of abuse by a criminal NCO who was later court-martialed and charged with rape of his stepdaughter. And I saw the good and bad of how Army dealt with that then. But it was quite traumatic to me as a young soldier. I felt very threatened by it. I saw the system pivot in a couple of ways.
Yep.
And I look back now as another formative experience in that pucker time. And I've had to struggle. I've struggled with it sometimes. What happened that night? And I'm not going to unpack it now.
No.
But it was the worst kind of alcohol, bastardisation, corporals who were abusing their power and bullying and beating up trainees. It was worst case scenario. But that wasn't how I characterised my single experience. But that's really what happened.
So for
then
you,
I'm up to 6RA.
Yeah. So you really. Singleton was an eye-opener, and you really grew up and became a man. And
I think I was on the journey, mate. I was still very much, not a finished product, if you ever are, but it was certainly that they're very formative, early foundational experiences about soldiering and the profession of what I was dealing with here.
So you finish your time at Singleton, and then you mentioned that you post into 6 RAR, the famous 6
I
RAR.
was extremely lucky. There was 2 of us out of the platoon. Everyone else went to Townsville. Everyone out of that Sanananda platoon. The Battle of Sanananda is famous in the beachhead battles of New Guinea. Extremely difficult campaign. That was my platoon's name, Sanananda. And there was other officers, guys in out of that platoon who subsequently served, Paddy Hallinan. So I go to 6RA because I'm not old enough to go to the RDF. Luckily, myself and one other. And I land myself in Delta Company. I've got very formative experiences of landing at the platoon, at the battalion, being met at the battalion headquarters, marched over to meet the CSM of Delta Company 6RA, who was one of Australia's most famous soldiers, Bruno Flamati, Distinguished Conduct Medal, led the counter-attack acting platoon sergeant A Company at Coral. So this is my experience as I joined the Army. And I have no idea of Bruno's backstory, but I know how shit scared the NCO is marching me in as a 17-year-old digger. So that's my lived experience of arriving at 6RA, mate, meeting Bruno and wondering why the NCO is so toey. And then I realised, because I was like, and then I went, oh my God. Then I joined the Army. I got to 6RA.
So you get to 6RAR.
Yeah, OC was Pat Cullinan, later Summit at Everest, AM Star of Courage. So that's the Army I joined, mate.
Yeah, right.
OC CSM. How lucky am I? And a whole bunch of other legends sprinkled around the company, as the Army was it then.
Yeah.
That's my fond memory.
So
I'm probably embellishing it, but that's what I feel like now.
You get to 6RAR, and then is that where you start to really craft the soldier and do?
I think so. Yeah, the esprit de corps, the airborne. It was it became. There was a sense of esprit de corps. Obviously, the martial competence. It was foundational. Bush in the battalion in the 80s. You go bush duties or sport. Rinse, repeat.
Yep.
So I was gifted to go into a rifle company that was reasonably well resourced. I got my para course early. I had great leadership, and the Army just was that Army, and then I got the call to attend selection, and that journey started very early in terms of my pursuit of what became then my career or my now vocation. But as I joined, and I was sort of taken on a bit of a magic carpet ride, because that's how lucky I was to join that organisation. Shane Coy was a fellow soldier in D Company. Shane's a guy I respect, Major General Shane Coy. I've obviously got blinkers on and parochial views, but I was pretty lucky to land in 6RA D Company with that sort of vibe going on.
Absolutely.
With the Airborne Parachute Company group before 3RA. So that's my memory.
So you mentioned
supercharged by it, I think, in a way. You
mentioned selection, and you went for selection in 1982.
I attended selection 82. I did.
Tell me about that. Tell me about physically and mentally preparing for that selection, because you were still, what were you, 19, 20?
Spoiler alert. Adam, I'm going to write a book this year about my 3 selection courses, and I'm going to talk the Trinity selection. That's when I can unpack a little bit more in detail. So, and I want to talk more about the latter selections now. But my earliest memories of preparing were, signing the rifle out, not with the bolt, take it down the guard room, and then early in the morning unsign it out of the guard room and go on a 9-miler and run down the streets out and back from the back gate of Enoggera,
Mm-hmm.
doing 9 milers. That was a barrier test you had to pass. Stomping out the back of the close training area. 6th RA had a culture of reconnaissance and pathfinder in D Company, and they were the bridge into the old the pathway into the Special Forces, and the SAS connection was that
Mm-hmm.
genre.
Yeah, right.
SAS then was RSFUs, and they ran pathfinder programs, and there was connections, both martial and professional and personal, into that fraternity that I wasn't aware of, but it was there inside the battalion.
Yep.
I later then, so my 82 course, very formative. Look, there's lots to think about on that course, and as I said, I'll talk about the book, but snapshots. Well, I finished it. I wrote a limerick about it,
Mm-hmm.
and people on LinkedIn have seen my limerick. The young boy had big dreams, but no clue. The journey took more than he knew. To finish, you can't pull the pin. To finish a small win, stronger and harder this work you must do.
Mm.
And that's probably sums it up.
So, 82, you passed selection, not selected.
No. I completed selection. I spoke to Graham Bremer this week, who was the Wing SM, famous soldier, prairie dog, ran selection for 10, 15 years. Hans Fleer, one of Australia's most famous and best ever soldiers, that's my call, DCM, AM, was Captain Fleer, senior instructor. So that course was different. We didn't have PDI's running course. It was in Singleton. It was a brutal test of physical and mental endurance. I wasn't up to speed, although I was debriefed by Hans Fleer,
Mm-hmm.
and told me to go away and grow up, for the serious business of soldiering, but they saw some potential.
Mm-hmm.
And I was gifted by that bit of a flicker of hope.
So let's go forward to 84 and let's talk about, 82, you've mentioned what happened. How did that just make you more hungry and did you'd done selection in 82, so you knew what you were getting yourself into again in 84. How did you mentally and physically and mature coming back in 84?
I was blessed and lucky because I returned to the battalion. I was obviously devastated and disappointed, but at the same time, journeying through life, living in Brisbane, exploring myself, and I was selected to attend the recon course.
Mm-hmm.
So then I joined the reconnaissance platoon in 83.
Mm-hmm.
And that was another conveyor belt. There's a selection of group of us who became a very small cohort, and we all attended selection in 84.
Mm-hmm.
So, and under the leadership of the then snipers recon, they raised the platoon more formally. I was lucky enough to be selected. It was a combined course run at 8-9 RA in the close track. It was a tough course, really tough. I got the other end of it somehow. And so the 83 year was the prep year.
Mm-hmm.
Mentally, it was young guys join up, really solid foundation of all purposeful, a bit blind, but single issue zealots. You can see it now, and away we went, mate. And we would do crazy things like in 84, because I knew what to do. I knew I had to do the work in the stomping,
Mm-hmm.
and I had hit the gym, so I had to get some muscle on.
Yep.
I was like, I think I was 58 kilos ring and wet. I just, and I stomped around. My body, my frame wasn't really set up for. I had to do the work to get myself able to not be in such a blind, massive hurt that I could actually think about what I was meant to be doing beyond just survival,
Mm-hmm.
which often was my early memories.
Yep.
So I just did the work, and part of that, and we did the bush fieldcraft and the competencies, and found ourselves in 84 as a big cohort ready to go, and then the 84 course they made a video about, which is I'll jump ahead. This is the 40th anniversary this year of that course, but so 83 was the prep year, recon platoon, and I knew what I had to do, and we did the work.
So 84, you're on selection, and for you, what was the toughest part of that in 84, and how long was selection? How many started and how many finished with you?
Yeah. Everyone asked, was the next selection course harder? Yeah. Was it easier? Yeah. Each one has its moments. The 84 course they'd revamped it and repackaged it, so what I'd done before was not what they did again. They'd remodelled it, particularly Chris Roberts, the then CO, deliberately did that and made a video about it. They ran a documentary of it, The Battle for the Golden Road. the hardest part was every bit of it, because it kept discovering the endurance phase in Singleton in 82 was a death march, fire trail, march or die.
Mm-hmm.
We'll tell you when it end. And it was just an endless stomp to purgatory. And that's no fun in that.
Yeah, right.
Trust me. Then you get they say, okay, turn around and go back. And that's my memory of the 82 course. It was endless. We did something like 100 Ks just along a fire trail, mate. It was brutal.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then 84,
We're in the Stirlings, mate.
Yeah, right.
And the video tells the story. And we were off tracks in the Stirlings in the they called it the bracken, the steel wool, the hakea bush, and it was brutal, and it was a complete mind screw up. And Dave Backey captures it well. They took us down to Stirlings. We went, oh yeah, whatever, endurance phase, it's going to be tough. And then they gave us one day, and we won one peak. Oh my God! I got back, and I was just destroyed. It was up and down. Yeah, it was a 20K day, but it took us all day. And we got back with and then all the DS are like, we're in shell shock. Those who made it back, because half the course was still out there.
Wow.
And the next day they pulled out. They gave us these big maps, like this massive map, and said, "There's 5 checkpoints, 4 days." And we look at each other like it was shocker capture, mate. I was like, "This is a piss take. They're just going to re-roll this in a couple of hours. They're going to call it off." But no, and so the Stirlings was it was a really big mental challenge.
Yeah, right.
Because you had to be, you're on your own, and it was a brutal country, mate. And out of there on your own, it's tough. And you had to nav. A couple of poor buggers climbed the wrong feature. They'd just lost their fill, dropped their fill. Yeah, right. I'm on the top of checkpoint Juliet, and there's no DS there. Yeah, because you're not on Juliet, buddy. Climb back down and move to your left 3 Ks, and then you'll be on. You hear this poor candidate drop his fill on the radio. Okay, Kazovac to grid. Sorry. So and this is what I'll give you my lived experience. Mm-hmm. And I learnt this on my 82 selection. I was the sort of guy who revelled when others pulled the pin. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's good or bad, but that's what happens. It's like my career, mate. From private to brigadier, it's the Bradbury. You hang in there long enough, somehow, and I don't mean that you thrive on others' failures, but you then can ask yourself the same question. And at some point, everyone will ask themselves the question, what am I doing here? And I found that pulling the pin wasn't in my vocab. So the hardest thing was for me to manage myself through how am I going to do well enough to pass. I was massively performance anxiety in 84 because I knew what it was like to get to the end and not get a Guernsey. So the performance anxiety was huge, looking back now, that, I'm going to do it. And I was actually kicking most of the physical. I did okay. Yep. On reflection, I did pretty strong. But at the time, I was really hanging on tight.
So was it a high attrition rate too?
Yeah, the numbers... Look, yes, because the barrier tests were involved in the course. Mm-hmm. So the 2-miler and they were brutal scrubs. We went from high 180s down a sort of... you fall off a cliff pretty quick, and then after the Happy Wanderer endurance phase, it ends pretty quick. We went down about 40, finished about 25 selected. And of that 25, I'm talking about bayonets. There's always good people, really good. That used to be Cat C's, the chooks. Yep. To all the chooks out there, love you like a brother. But remember, look inside your beret, it's blue. Well, I take the piss. No, some of the best operators in the world were the beret chooks. Yep. But we had Cat C guys, and then there's the Ruperts, as I say, the officers on our Rio cycle. Mm-hmm. So it was a big attrition rate, but I think statistically about 25% from those who finish the Rio cycle. Mm-hmm. The selection's part of it.
So for you get through selection, you get told, Dan, you've met the minimum requirement to now join us on Rio.
Start your Rio cycle.
Yeah, start your Rio cycle. What was the toughest part about Rio? And for you, what was it like getting through Rio and being presented that famous Sandy beret?
It was a dream come true. A simple answer. Looking back, it was where I'd hoped to be. But at the same time, through the Rio cycle, each step was very difficult. Ours was in a package where you did survival and DEMS early, and then went back to the unit, packed up, were posted, and then had to do the patrol course to really get your beret and be badged to then join a squadron. And it's changed around. So that was our cycle as I remember it. The survival course was extremely difficult, as I remember. It was really as a character test. There was a lot of bush skills taught, but then you were just out there in a team, struggling with a very benign, difficult environment, making water. Island phase. They'd give you the fire sticks. That's when they invented swearing. When they invented making fire rubbing sticks together. Because if you've ever tried to make fire rubbing sticks together, that's when you start to get very creative in your swearing. Trust me. So and you get your fire sticks, and you're about 200 metres off the get out. So trying to swim with your fire sticks above your head in a breaking surf, it doesn't work, right? Anyway, so the patrol course was extremely difficult, demanding because of the environment down in Hoffman's Mill. But we were taught by expert fieldcraft masters. The resistance interrogation phase was extremely difficult. Straight after going to the bag, straight after 6 weeks, it felt real. It was quite. Look back, it was quite impactful. That Rio cycle.
So you get into the regiment, and tell me, mid-80s, Dan, what's the regiment like when you finally got in? And because we're talking, as we said, peacetime army. What was happening in the regiment when you first got there?
SAS at the time had just been gifted the operational role of the counter-terrorism domestic CT. So it was a big period of transformation renewal in the regiment. And all of the things that come with that. Early 80s. I joined in 84, so it was still early in context, and I entered into what was the war roll squadrons. The organisation was 2 and 3 squadron were war rolls, and that meant the force projection skills organisation, vehicle mounted, water or air, and there was a balance, I think. It wasn't 1 for 1. There was a weighted towards 2 squad. I went to 3 in K-Troop. Mm-hmm. So there's a force projection focus and classic sort of SR mission profiles in exercising.
Yeah, right.
But the focus was to get on team, to wait to get your chance to do the CT Rio cycle, which was an internal selection within the unit, to get on team, on the hill, where one squadron held the DCT role, which was down the back, killing house, DCT tag, inside the unit, another pathway. And that was the journey. That was what it was like. That's my memory. So I was, and of course I joined K-Troop. It had veterans of that CT era, had come back to war roles. My OC was Don Higgins. My SSM was Jim Wilshire. These are senior. Jim was a Vietnam vet. Troop Sergeant Murray Wesson. So I had a bunch of, and it was a force projection focus, and it was a sports parachute culture. So the great story about my early days in the K-Troop, I'd been a freefaller, civvy freefaller. So I joined. I never did a military freefall course. Is the people might be surprised to know. I'd had 130 civvy jumps and a C sporting licence. So my first military jump was out of a Huey, out of a borrowed parachute. And back in the day, you could get, if a parachute, the actual rig was certified, you could jump it out of military aircraft. Early 85, I'm in K-Troop. Those days, to get a freefall course was a 12-month wait. So guys my Rio cycle, who joined K-Troop, couldn't get on a freefall course for another 12 months. That's how it was. So they were sort of stuck in this purgatory in freefall, but not freefall qualified. Well, Fortune was very, very lucky. It kissed on the bum. I'd done 130 civvy jumps, skydiving in my 83 year, through adventure training, yada yada. There was a big sports parachute culture. They knew that. The then OC of this continuation training that was planned in February 85 down at the Oval at Swanbourne, a Huey, 2 Hueys come over and they're jumping, and I'm like, I couldn't believe it. I'm like a dog with 2 dicks. I didn't know which one to lick. I'm finally going to get a jump out of a military aircraft. I've been paying for it. You can imagine. I'm like, I'm excited now thinking about how excited I was.
Yeah.
But I wasn't qualified. So, not stopping Dan Fortune. So I got a certified rig and said to Terry Hewitt, I think it was, or Wayne Carroll, rest in peace. Wayne just recently passed, tragically. And these were the gurus, the FFIs, the freefall instructors who could run the training. Mm-hmm. They looked at me and said, "Yeah, no, it's okay. Certified rig, yep, good, yeah, okay, yep, no, it's good to go." That was the culture of these guys. They backed themselves and they knew I could do it. No worries. Yeah, a little loose. We'll get to that. On my rig was certified, but my reserve was out of currency. So I'm jammed. That was not stopping me. So I borrowed a rig that was in currency, a mate of mine. First jump, I'm talking it up. I get up in a Huey. I'm completely overconfident. I charge off the exit and I fall off the exit. And the freefallers will know forward speed of the aircraft impacts on your exit trajectory. With an aircraft, when you're in hover, you don't have any forward speed. So I fell off the exit, just cartwheeled down, very embarrassing. Looked like a muppet. So I got stable, opened, and everyone thought, I thought you could jump. I'm like, bugger off, I'll show you blokes. Humiliated. But I'm over Swanbourne out of a Huey. I've got the jump in my logbook. So I've repacked. Now I'm repacking the main of my borrowed rig that I'd never closed before. When you close a parachute, you have to stow the bridle line after you stow the lines, and then you've stowed the pilot chute. Well, I've got it packed into the container, but I didn't do it correctly, apparently, because the next jump, I'm determined to reclaim the glory, which I did. Hot dogged it out, Did you see me? Went low, and then yanked it out, and oh my God, I've got a high-speed MAL. I've got a bag lock. I've got the bridle line, the line stretch, but I've got a bag lock because I haven't closed it well enough to get I've packed myself a high-speed MAL. So I got off it. Terminal opening on a roundy. That's why I've got 5 prolapse discs in my C45. Oh my God. I threw away the handles, which is a no-no in parachuting protocols. I didn't care. I was alive. I land under reserve on the golf course next to Swanbourne. It's ladies' morning. I get recovered. There's a separate story about the adjutant getting a lot of complaints and a lot of very upset private members, Cottesloe, Blue Bloods, because the main that was detached from me when I cut it away floated down, and the drillers, someone follows the main down, and this individual did a bit of a hot landing in front of so there was all sorts of atrocities occurred while I was being recovered. Go back to the DZ, and then the senior instructor, Captain Steve Evans, Steve's a champion, wanders over and says, "Who the hell are you?" "Well, I'm Trooper Fortune, haven't you heard?"
Well, if he hadn't, he heard now.
And then there was a very brief conversation with me. Steve wandered over to the sergeants. They got a personal chat. I was grounded, never ever, and then I was subsequently qualified on our parachute continuation series, where I was strapped to fore and aft, old rig. They bred an FFI from PDS.
Yep.
They followed me out of a port. My first qualified jump was sideways with full kit, fore and aft, and equipment out of a porter. I cartwheeled down to height, got stable. They said, "Yeah, okay," and I then was qualified at the end of the para series. So that's a true story about my freefall experience. So the so what of all that, it was a forced projection, focus, wonderful memories, lots of skills insertion, but we all just want to get on team, mate. I got on team at the end of 2 years.
So in that, was it a near-death experience?
Oh, without question, mate. I was seconds away from spearing in. It caused a death impact. And not my first MAL. I had an earlier one in my civvy career. Again, self-imposed, overconfidence. So I learnt that I was putting myself in positions, I was able to get out of them, but looking back, I was able to apply the lessons learned and not do that again.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Because how old were you, Dan, when that happened?
Wow. I was 21. Yeah.
So any 21-year-old, bulletproof,
Yeah, life-changing, life-critical experience. Yeah, looking back, and I was remarkable, at the time viewed as very cool hand Luke and maybe playing that persona on a bit.
Mm-hmm.
But look, I had... There's positives about the culture in the regiment, about the trust, but there was obviously areas around lack of assurance and, hang on a minute, there's a bit loose here.
Mm.
You can see that perspective too. I can. Organisation, looking back, you're creating risks that you just don't understand.
So you mentioned you get onto team after 2
did the
years.
trickle system in early '87, and
Yep.
then it was really that was probably one of the highlights of my career. Was the early on operational service, now recognised much later. On the tag, I was the last of the trickle. They then changed the force gen rotation.
Mm-hmm.
So and it was very much that was a very seminal time in my career as an operator.
Mm-hmm.
I struggled early on the close quarter battle course.
Mm-hmm.
When I did a basic and then advanced CQB, it was 4 weeks. You didn't start shooting until about day 4. There was a lot of what we call DP dry practices, extremely strict safety regimes. You were off the course if you had safety. 1 major or 2 minors, gone, no questions asked. So it's a brutal selection within a selection, and also bit clicky and clubbish too about, and then there was going to be a sniper or an assaulter. Because you then did the sniper training, which was the CT sniper course, which was hitting movers on command with all the field craft like a sniper course. It was extremely... One of my proudest moments was that I passed all the live fire stalks and I topped out the sniper course.
Yeah, right.
Because I had built off my field craft skills, but I wanted to be an assaulter, mate. I wanted to be a door kicker. But I was not particularly good pistol shooter.
Okay.
I struggled with my pistol shooting. I was good, solid in the house, and I knew my drills, and I was good situation awareness when it was all going down. And that probably saved me because my pistol shooting was marginal. And in those days, you had to validate 80% at no notice throughout the course, 2010, 80%. Single-handed pistol shooting, 9mm double tap. Single-handed, not rapid aim 2. The DP was you closed that, you gripped, you pulled your SMG in, one-handed, cool hand Luke, and I'm a left-handed of the devil, mate. Pull it out, bang, bang. And I'm not a big guy. So I worked hard on my posture, my left hand strength, and you had to get a hold of that 9mm, mate, and put it down range. So I struggled, but I was able to get through the CT selection process and get selected for A troop, and I went into this land troop. I was an MOE operator, Alpha 2-3, with really, really experienced troop of... I was then the youngest by years. I was always a junior woodchuck, and I was in my early 20s, which now is not the case. Even at 25 by then, I was still the youngest guy in the troop.
Yeah, right.
And these were experienced blokes, my team sergeants, guys, Al Williams. They're just I look back, huge role models. And we'll come, veterans, but peacetime veterans who carried the torch, but standards guys. And it was a wonderful. And we did the CT Series 87, and then the Force Gen cycle pivoted. 2 squadron and the regiment changed, and they rotated a squadron line, but 50% and the most recent of the Rios on to CT stayed. So I did another year extended. I was very lucky, very happy, and pivoted into G Troop 2 Squadron, and I never ever served outside of 2 Squadron. Yeah, right. But I started in 3 and 1. People say, I was OCG and OC3, 2, subsequently, and we'll talk about that. But I didn't serve in 2 until I'd served in 3 and 1. And we force-genned into 2. I was pivoted into G Troop. That CT Olympics was a really formative period. Again, 87, 88, really formative, tough CT handover. And I was in the middle of it as an assaulter, sort of the old guy, but in the trenches as the new guys came on. Yep. And Rios that I'd joined with, finally I got to serve with, a guy called Bruce McLennan, from 6RR Recon. I became driver, he was MOE, and we were Alpha 2, Golf 2, and that was a magic year in 88. That I remember, although I got badly injured in early 88 on team. I severed a tendon, and it was partly my own fault, partly lack of oversight. Anyway, I severed a tendon. I had a period off training, my trigger finger. Got through rehab, a lot going on in my personal life, and sort of got back in black, and then had that final 6 months. And it was around that time that the next step in my journey was formulating in my mind.
So you mentioned that you had some amazing mentors and people that were just real good to be around and sort of shaping you into the future. And you mentioned in 1988 you got injured, but then you also, in 1988, we go back to what your father said, where you should head down the officer path. And what was the thought behind that, Dan?
Well, okay, yeah, because I did subsequently 30 years in as a Rupert. So the calling then was, I was drifting, to be honest. Professionally, I was getting, a bit too big for my boots. And when I get distracted, I can get, take some risk-taking activity, just get a bit loose and lazy. And I knew that. And there was a yearning to have a crack at the title, to be an officer, in myself. I thought I had it in me, and it became part of my personality type, obviously. Dad had said that I had also put my hand up at the start of Singo. And in those days, there was an OCS Portsea model that was in place. My charge at Singo stopped that. And it was actually on my course report. But I'd recovered by competence to some extent. By the time I marched out, they said he's 12 months in battalion before he should even consider reapplying for OCS. So I put my hand up, and that was just scrubbed out. So it had always been there as a backdrop. And then, then the SAS thing came, and it was like, forget about it. And actually, Dave Harper, to his credit, was my first troop commander in K Troop There's a squadron photo in 85 of 3 Squadron. I'm not in it. Because it was in Reggie Week, and Dave told me, he directed me to go and talk to recruiting about becoming an officer. This is 85. Or 86. Because I was obviously apparently might have been a bit gobby as a trooper. I was Dave's patrol SIG. So he probably wasn't short of advice on how to run the troop and the patrol from me.
Yep.
So I finally get to 88, and it just was the thing, and it gave me a real focus. And I've got my diary from 88, and it was early in my objectives was to get selected, and that injury probably was pivotal because I put at risk my career as an operator.
Mm-hmm.
I had taken that for granted in many ways, and when you have it's like a career-changing injury, potentially, I was able to get back on the horse and get back in I wasn't quite sure I was able to shoot left-handed again, but I was able to. I had to cut the finger out of my glove so I could manipulate the trigger and change my grip. And then, but I was competent and my martial skills were really solid by then. It didn't matter.
Problem solving. Good way of problem solving.
Yeah, and I had the muscle memory and I was a really good operator by then. I was really good. I was a jet, mate. I just was. Yeah, I'm no longer. I lost that feel very quickly. But I think back then I was. I could. We used to validate and I was on team for 2 years, and we were shooters. That's what we did, 3 days a week down the range. Either did driver training, or shot. That was my life for 18 months. It was a bit of a life of Riley, really.
Yeah.
So Duntroon was also a reality check, mate. It was back to the world.
Well, let's talk about that. 1989.
So I went on leave.
Royal Military College.
Role models, So I interrupted probably the answer that you asked me about role models or going to Duntroon.
Yeah.
So I was blessed with Mike Hindmarsh, who was my OC, encouraged me to apply, supported the formal application. Jim Wallace was the CO. So in 88, when I actually went through the journey, I was well supported and wonderfully supported by my chain of command. And Mike, who I subsequently served with a lot, was at the very start of one of the most formative relationships, and one of the guys I rate as one of the huge role models. You mentioned that earlier. Hans Fleer, OC, Pat Cullinan, without question. At Duntroon, about to meet one of them, Chris Appleton. But at that point, there'd been those magical figures like Hans Fleer, the martial warrior, but humble, but just so revered by others. Hindmarsh it was early days then, but he backed me in. Jim Wallace as a CO. And I had so many wonderful NCO and standards men. Just standards guys. Showed me what good looked like.
Yep.
And they clipped me around the ears often. And I got my subject courses. I did my promotion courses as a trooper. And I did my subject 2 for corporal at Tully. I got a good report, but I was often wrong, never in doubt. And I was formally warned on my subject 1 for corporal because I was a gobby smart ass. And I had to pull my head in and then I got to the other end of it and they said, he does well in the field, but he needs to change his attitude. And they were exactly right. So these things were read back to me when I applied for Duntroon.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that now. You go to Duntroon in 1989.
Yep.
You've been at the pinnacle. So you've been at the pinnacle of SAS, an operator. How was that shifting the mindset from being an operator to now? I'm now learning the craft of becoming an officer.
It was a fascinating. It wasn't as sort of deliberate as that, to be honest, but it was certainly a transition, and I think the journey for that deliberate. I was seeking something beyond what I was. I was bored and I was culminating, and I didn't like the idea of I was about to be promoted to corporal. The transition was helped by the fact that Pat Cullinan had just summited Everest, had come back and had done a tour debriefing how that expedition, the 88 Everett expedition, had concluded its work. And they'd trekked into Nepal. So in the time between when I left, I was selected for Duntroon in October. I had a lot of leave in my book. I had over 100 days leave. And this is where I was supported. Murray Blake was the commandant at Duntroon. When I was finally given the job, in my final interview, they called me back in and said, anything you want to say? Well, said, if I am selected, I'd like a break. I'd like early advice because I've got to leave and I want to get this SAS stuff out of my head. Mike Hindmarsh came in the next day and said, I've just had General Blake on the phone. Said, send Fortune on leave. And he hung up. So that's how the real world works. So obviously I was getting a Guernsey.
Yeah.
The letters would follow. I was directed on leave. I had a week to clear my leave. Yeah, I just left the regiment, so did a quick fadeaway. H said something nice, and the regiment's driving on. So Dan just disappeared. He's got it done, and I left. I took 2 months leave, headed overseas. So I had an air gap. I trekked into Nepal, went to base camp, went to Thailand. So in my journey of my life, I was mentally preparing myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in a pretty good space when I landed at RMC January '89. I was ready for what was coming, and it was a wonderful journey. I was so thrilled to be there, and I wasn't struggling with the transition. I was. Yeah, that came later, and ICT, initial core training at Madura, and immersing myself in the RMC. I was just feeling really. I was like Boy Scout, mate. I love that stuff, and so I was in my happy space. I didn't really have that comparison that I think now, but clearly there was some things going on. I had to be careful of my other rank tendencies, but I was very lucky. My OC was Chris Appleton. And, of all of the statesmen, soldiers, scholars, he's the standard bearer. So he showed me, and I learned then it was not subject one for lieutenant, Mr. Fortune. This is a whole of life experience. You step up, the military ethic.
So for you, Dan, what was the hardest part of RMC, looking back now?
Look, probably managing myself and my journey through life at that point. There was RMC. I was lucky, mate. I had life experience, and I didn't struggle. And I wouldn't have made it at 18. I have huge admiration for the young classmates now that I didn't have. I lacked empathy. I was probably just self-orientated, and I was an ex-servie, 25 years, 8 years in the army, in SAS corporal. RMC wasn't hard. If I'm really brutal in terms of martial competence, I learned a lot about myself, and I learned very much that I wasn't very competent as a leader, and I had a lot to learn, and that was probably. The takeaway was a bit of a reflection of imposter syndrome, and I've got a bit of work to do, because at that stage, in my journey of life, there was a lot of else going on at the end. So that's what I remember. But I was just so happy to be other end of RMC and up to 1 hour round. Let's get into it, mate.
Well,
it wasn't hard, but I was so lucky to be part of it, and it was a very special time at RMC. But my memories of RMC are more recent and contemporary about my time as a CO, really.
We'll talk about that.
Blurry back in the 89.
We'll talk about that a little bit down the track. But you mentioned 1 RAR, so the big blue one.
Yep.
Let's talk about your time up there as an officer, a young officer.
Very fond memories. Very, very lucky. I went to 1 RAR, myself and John Simeone, Chris Appleton, our OC, the Green Puckaree. We knew we were going to 1 RAR was in Townsville, 3 Brigade. It was soldiering in the early 90s, service protected evacuation, thugs and thongs. Army was a bit of an army without a strategy, and a strategy without an army. If you look at if I look now at my academic review of where that was, but as a young subby, mate, had a resource rifle company. I threw in a 6th platoon. Learned some really difficult and early seminal lessons. They were a great bunch of diggers, classic Aussie soldiers. Mine were solid in the field, bloody complete hand grenades in the barracks. Patchy sort of OC and CSM. I was early married, young family, which isn't not normally for a subby. So there's a lot going on there. But fond memories, and we had lots of work to do with resources out bush, a lot of time away, up at bloody. It pissed down rain up in the wet up in Toomballoomba and all those places. I remember that. Tough field time. A lot of time in the field. A lot of hardcore rifle platooning.
Yep.
It's great fun.
Well, part of that too, you were awarded Champion Rifle Platoon in 1991.
True story, we were. Yes, and that was one of my most proudest moments because I was on my officer NCO mortar course when they had announced it. And so we were Champion Platoon. And, that was because I had a great team, and I think if I was to be brutally honest, I was probably given a few free kicks by the DS because I had a bit of a pedigree. To be honest, if I'm brutally honest, they probably gave me a bit of a pass on things others might have not got a pass on, because I wasn't that much better than anyone else going around, mate. To be honest, but on the day I could get it done, and we'd done the work, and I knew my job, and I had a reputation. I think as I was gaming, so I just beasted them. I flogged them, mate. And they just copped it, and and that's what happened. They'd come over for knockoff, and they'd stop coming over early, mate, because I was right on below the heaven beam. But they've got fond memories now, and they call themselves the Soldier Fortune, and the esprit de corps was strong. But I wasn't consciously developing it. I was just being that subby, and I just, harden up, you weak bastards, because, it could be tomorrow. And I really believed that, even though it wasn't. And then all of a sudden, and at the end of my time in 1RA, mate, I did selection again, and we can talk about that.
Yeah.
They go to Somalia. Good on them. I'm the guy who didn't go. After being 2.5 years in the Bun, I slept at night just. But, so I've got wonderful memories of the guys from 1RA, and I still saw them at Anzac Day. And the subbies there, and the rifle platoon, they went to mortars. I had a great time. And a formative time in my career, and I learned a lot.
So, you mentioned again in 1992 you attempt selection again. This time as an officer. What was the driving factor to go back? And can you explain to me, Dan? Is when an officer goes for selection, is their selection different to non-commissioned officers, or is it the same?
Well, I'll answer that question, the second bit first. There is a officer module in selection. Mm-hmm. And in my lived experience, there is a different lens put on officers, as there bloody should be. Now, most recently, and I spoke to Chris Roberts, former CO, who was the CO when the documentary was made of the 84 course, and there's a superb cameo that we'll catch in due course about his brief to the officers. Mm-hmm. And he uses language that is hard to, often not familiar with the bureaucrats we've got running the place now, like officer qualities, toughness. So, yes, it is different, and there should be. And it was particularly difficult as an officer attending selection again. Particularly, I wasn't on my own. There was three of us who'd gone through the officer path. Dave Armott, who's dead, and Pete Tinley, a member of the West Australian government and a former cabinet minister or minister in that side of the government, a great mate of mine, Pete. Huge respect for him. And he and I did attended selection, and he was selected also, and we served together as troop commanders and squadron commanders together. Mm-hmm. So, while it's unique, there's others who've done it. Pete will tell his own story. The Officer 92 course was really, really tough. And why was, I was, mate, sometimes there was moments, what the hell have I done? I've left the regiment, subbing in 1RA. I had a platoon that, and I fucked up big time occasionally. I was a muppet. In what I thought I knew and what I didn't know, mainly around sort of governance and my responsibilities. We had a rifle going missing, an SLR, that I was unable to account for. Now, there's a complex set of circumstances, and the CQ was later court-martialed. But when that happens, it's no good. And I did weapons checks for 6 months, in the armoury as punishment. And probably unfair, but, it was a formative lesson. So regimental service as a subby with a young family, it wasn't always beer and skid, it was in a careering sense. Mm. And you're never sure. I was, my reporting was patchy. I was not likely to be promoted beyond major. Yeah, reality was, I was old, mate. And I was ex-servie from Duntrine. So it's a Portsea model, you major or you're not. Now that's obviously been disrupted, and I'm not saying I was discriminated against, but it was some tough times, and I questioned what the hell. So going back to the unit and hearing about it and yearning, then there was also massive family pull. From the very start, my family and the love and the bonds was a huge factor. I'm a 5'5" number, and that element I'll write about in my book in more detail and with more context. But so the huge pull was professional. Yeah, I wanted to get back into the Special Forces community, mate, because it wasn't working for me. I loved my time in 1RA, but in reality, it wasn't my peeps. Mm. And I wanted to set up my family at home because we're all from Perth. Lorraine was from Perth. My wife's from Perth. So,
talk to me through that you'd been an operator, and going back, some of the DSs knew who you were. Did you feel that the 92 selection was harder than your 84 selection because in 84 you weren't known as what you were in 92?
Yes, in certain aspects, absolutely. Because but there was a paradigm that had to be challenged. Mm-hmm. There would certainly be a view within the officers of the mess, and I would be one of the first cheerleaders of this view, that they need to demonstrate that they're not just some operator. Now, this is a complex issue inside the regiment. I'm not going to pick that up because there's a lot of goodness in NCOs and graduating through ASWOC and the PSO program, but there's also real risks there, and the regiment's experienced ups and downs of both. So I'm just going to park that.
Yeah.
But it's an issue, right? So yes is the answer. And as a trooper, I would have polarised the view as Gobby. Now, I won the cross country in 1987. Very popular win. I was pretty toey. The only reason I won it is because the guy in front of me, my troop commander, went the wrong way at the final kilometre. He got on the wrong side of the boundary fence. Now, whether he was directed on the wrong side of the fence by the malingering trooper who pointed him that way or not is beside the point. When I realised he's on the wrong side of the fence, got a burst of energy. He's like literally run past me, double back to the gate. I get across the line first. Hugely popular victory. I'm awarded the trophy by the CO, Terry Nolan at the time. He says, "Oh, Trooper Fortune." Oh! I said, for those who didn't know, Captain Keefe, Paul Keefe, hey boss, had it won. But there's an old adage in the regiment, mate. Time in reconnaissance is seldom wasted. Oh, boys give me a big cheer, and all these officers like, "You smart ass little bastard, we'll get you." So I'm sure I was. And there's a particular activity in the officer module, and I write about it in the obituary in the rendezvous, but it's called the Circle of Friends. So the officers do this. I don't know if they still do it, but we did it. And you come in as a candidate, and there's a huge shape. It's like Shark Attack, hostile audience. One against many, and it's just sledging and hectoring. Right? That's the way I took it.
Yeah.
So, but this is me, Lieutenant. Lucky I was still an LT, so Lieutenant Dan comes in. I'm an LT, Lieutenant Dan. So I'm in there. Yeah. And I'd kick the ass out of the run, and I was squared away early on. And there was a particular couple of officers in there who were not particularly fond of my views and my style. Fair enough. So they had a go at me. There was that edge. But on the same side, there was others who probably, were backing me in. And later in the course, I felt that at some points there was a sense of, hang in there. And one of the most seminal moments on my officer course, if I could share that right now.
Yeah, please.
Is the DS on my 82 course, Peter Lutley, Warrant Officer Pete Lutley, became an SSM of mine when I was on team. 92, I'm looking at the same watch I'm wearing now. It's a Seiko 88 Turtle. We're on a portage activity. It's day 2 of the lucky dip of Officer 92. It's horrendous because we did a shortened course. 92 was winter, KD 92. It was a bit off the reservation. There was some subsequent IGADF inquiries into the conduct of the R2I. So that's a historical fact. It was a brutal course. It was compressed, no rest periods between phases. Normally, so endurance phase or Happy Wanderer, you go stomp the Sterlings, have a day or two, go rappelling, get a couple of meals in, transition to lucky dip. Similarly, in the skills phase and the individual endurance phase, there'd be a period of time, then you go down on Happy Wanderer. Then that was the typical tempo of a course, and it's articulated in the Battle for the Golden Road. 92 compressed, all the phases, no rest. We got moved from a demanding individual endurance Happy Wanderer phase we did in Lancelin. So 3 selections, 3 different Happy Wanderers, 3 different terrain palettes. Mate, each one was like, oh my fucking God, I thought the Sterlings was bad, We get to Lancelin. I'm laughing because that's how I deal with stress and trauma, right? We get out there, and it's just like, it's flat, and it's like this low, still wool bush. Guys came out of it 4 days with their trousers torn off them. It was just brutal, and it was all feet caught, and you're on paces and bearings for like kilometres. They hadn't validated the course. They'd done one leg, because they'd obviously pulled this course out of their arse because the Sterlings got shut down on them. So they went, oh, fucking Lancelot, better sort that out. Oh, did it off the map, walked one leg and said, so the standard they set, mate, was unachievable. So Lancelot was purgatory. And we were like, we did like way below the bell curve. And we all got debriefed on it. At the end of the Lancelot, all the officers were lined up and said, you're as weak as piss. You have done below standard. We just got I remember and then about 4 of them got called out, and the rest of and they got and on the truck, get your shit, you useless, go. That was a bad debrief, and that created some much culture that wasn't necessary, and it wasn't good. But that was the culture of that course, mate. It was brutal, and we were doing it hard. And I listened to that debrief and thought, that's not the way to do it. But I was glad I wasn't copping it. because they were just brutal. They were chopping officers left, right and centre. I was not paraded to get on the truck and pissed off. So when I see Pete Lutley, we've been strapped into trucks, those who are still surviving, like those cattle wagons. From wherever we were, we stopped at Swanbourne. I know we didn't get out. They stopped, changed drivers. Lancelin to Swanbourne, bang down to Hoffman's Mill, out. Welcome to Happy Wanderer. Piss and rain. And I felt no word of a lie. Then the officers who'd been doing our thing separately, we got the kit check. They said, oh, you guys got your wet weather gear? Oh, you officers don't need that stuff. Give us your wet weather gear. Whatever. So, raincoat, Japara, bye-bye. And it's just pissing down in mate, it was brutal. And then so I'm doing this portage activity. You know the antenna?
Yeah.
You know those big lightweights?
Yep.
And all this we're portaging this shit endlessly we're just on this death march and I'm in charge and it's not going well.
So are you thinking at that point, what am I doing here?
Oh, mate, seminal moment. I looked at Pete Lutley and Pete Lutley, he's looking at me and he's looking at me, what are you doing here? I'm like, I just laughed and he laughed too. I just laughed at him and he laughed at me and he said, oh, Mr. Fortune. I went, g'day, Sabre. And because he'd seen me in 82 as a Muppet, and at the first BOS in 82, the Border Studies in 1982, Private Fortune was gone. I was BOS'd out, mate. Yeah. But Hans Flair gave me a free pass. I've told the story, I'll tell it in the book. I was gone because I was a Muppet. I was useless. I was deserved to be BOS. So I'd passed the physical. They were looking like, what are you doing here? You're not really a boy. The Falklands War was on. Hans looked at me and said, this is important in the context of Pete Lutley. What don't you have demonstrate? I looked at this board, and this is Hans Flair, DCM, legend. I went, oh, common sense and maturity. And he looked at me and went, you're right. And I think the fact I was a 6 RAR and Hans had been in 6, he gave me a bit of a free kick. And he gave me a big rev and said, get out and sort your shit out. But I didn't get the bullet. Everyone else who went in there got the bullet. I go back to the DS hut. Pete Lutley says, what are you doing here? Well, I don't know, Sarge, I'm just real... So he storms off and works out that Hans has not pissed me off when he should have. So 10 years later, in the middle of a portage in the pouring rain, Lieutenant Dan.
Here I am.
Hey, Pete. And I'm looking at this watch and I'm going, oh, fuck, it's early and a long day. That's what I remember, mate.
Wow.
And then I got to the other end of it, and one of my proudest moments was getting debriefed by Duncan. And we're taken back to Swanbourne. We did the R2I. I was casevaced out of the R2I. I was really busted. I was very sick. I'd been carrying injury in my leg, and then I got cellulitis in my elbow.
Yep.
I'd gone septic. I was feral. I was busted.
Wow.
And luckily, they'd obviously decided I was being selected because the BOS occurred during the R2I phase. Mm-hmm. So I was casevaced out. Some time into it, I was a bit hallucinogenic, and I can't remember because I was on the blanket. And that was my second time through the SF R2I. It was a weird time, and they got better at the R2I. The first experience I remember wasn't as punishing as the second time. Yep. The sensory overload and the difficult, the stress positions and the no clothes. Oh, I was in the locker. That was the hardest part, but it wasn't part of selection. Yeah, and there's this issue there that's been addressed organisationally. Anyway, so we get back to Swanbourne. I've been IV'd, so I've got over the worst of the infection, but I'm still loaded up. I'm busted. But we're all coming to debrief. We're up in the CO's office. There was a Five Nations game on. Australia was playing the rugby. I'll never forget it because it's rugby culture, and I'm like, fuck me, this is officers and the adjutants there, and the adjutants with all the old Ruperts, and we're getting the death march. And the way they did it then was really, really the way they did it. And I'll tell you why that's weird, because you never saw your mates again.
Oh,
come through. You walk through the green door, the red door, mate. That's it. So you've just been in the down range with them. You don't see much of them, and then all of a sudden you look at each other and go, what the fuck was that like for you? You're just like, it's like getting released from, the solitary confinement. You together, and then it's like, okay, get your verdict. I'm filled in 84, coming out of my debrief, getting my beret, getting the pass in the 84 course as a little cameo. 92, I walk in, Duncan, How do you reckon you went? He said, well, and I just like, I think I swore. It was almost like a huge relief.
Yep.
Huge relief. It wasn't euphoria, it was relief.
Yeah, right.
I was like, that's what I felt. So why is that weird? It wasn't euphoria, it was relief. I think that's about the backstory of what I was carrying forward in terms of what I felt my obligations, responsibilities were to the family, and that I hadn't given those bastards a chance to, shoot me down sort of thing. I'd shown them that I could do it sort of thing. But maybe that's just performance punishment on yourself. I don't understand it. My psych tells me there's something going on there, and I'm working on it.
In 92, Dan, do you feel it meant more to you that that because you had to work harder to get that beret?
Yeah, the crowning achievement. Yeah, win, lose or draw, and I can say this because I'm the guy who walked through the walk ground. The officer selection was more demanding, and it should be, because that's okay. But I carry my own parochial baggage, and I can say that. But that might not be necessarily what the regiment says now, but certainly for me, that was my experience. Yeah, getting out, and I've looked at my course report, and I know I was rated strongly by the DS, and I know in Lucky Dip, that very last thing, to rate your mates, they do a rate your mates, and you rate your mates, and I know my score at the end of that, and that's probably my proudest artefact, is looking at what others said about me and what the DS said about me during my officer selection.
So Dan, let's talk about you early years. Now you've passed as an officer. And tell me through the early years of the 90s in the regiment.
I joined 2 Squadron and I was assigned as a troop commander. And because of my Freefall backstory, it was a natural fit and I was very keen. So I was assigned OCG troop. My OC was Jeff Singelman, later SOCOS, 2-star officer of some repute. I was very lucky to have Jeff as my boss. I learned a lot from him. And probably at the point where I was gifted that at some point Jeff had to let you get on with it. When he was a staff officer, that wasn't the case. So I have great sympathy and no empathy for others who work with Jeff. He had a reputation. Let's just say the nickname the Dark Lord was assigned to Jeff by his COs when he was commander of 6th Brigade. And I can understand why they would have done that. But I have immense respect for Jeff in many regards. Other things later as SOCOS, I might offer he didn't get it right, but hey, that's just my view. We'll start the controversial stuff early.
Yes.
But Jeff was my OC, so it was a fascinating time. The regiment at that point was in a bit of a transition because they hadn't been selected to go to Somalia. One area had, which we talked about, and that had hit hard. And one of the seminal moments that I recall was late 92 or early 93. Murray Black, the then Land Commander, General Blake, former Commandant Duntroon. He left and became the Land Commander. He had a famous nickname, the Butcher of Bimbar, Black the Snake, and highly respected warrior. He came over and basically up the Gratwick Club, the booze, and the questions were, and he good on him. He took the questions. CO introduced him, and he said, and one of the senior NCO said, "Well, why didn't we go to Somalia?" He said, "Well, we didn't have confidence in you. The brigade commanders didn't have confidence in you because they didn't know who you were." Words to that effect. It was a real kick in the guts, but it was classic Blake. Well, you fix it, your problem. You need to work. The message: you need to work more in army, and demonstrate to the senior operational commanders that advise me that you can. They have confidence in you because right now they're telling me they don't. Now, whether that's right or wrong, do you hear the Land Commander tell you that? Okay, fair bump, play on. So then there was early deployments. The Goebbels, the UN. We sent a section across. We, the regiment. Also, Mal Woods was the first, I think, sergeant. 84 Rio. Malcolm made his name there. It was a great job, and they did a wonderful job, and in many ways regained the battlefield credibility, reputation. It started in that journey. So we were trying to invent and reimagine what the regiment might be. It was from CT it evolved to the early days of the SRO. It was very much the cusp, and Jeff and the other OCs around the time led into that. The domestic CT wasn't fit for purpose anymore. It was the offshore recovery model. You might remember the Cambodia hostage situation. So there was all sorts of capabilities that we were exploring on the edge of the boundaries of DOMSEC, domestic CT, and they were into what would later much become the pedigree and the mission profile of a direct action, special recovery, or some form of targeting mission profile, kinetic. But in a freefall sense, I was lucky. There was independent training team activities. The troop commander got to go to Thailand, do the reconnaissance, and then later go with a troop, combined Royal Thai Army, a C-130 assigned for the whole period, for a month. So we did 40, 50 jumps. So I was there to number. And inside the regiment, force projection, we're still working. There was pathfinding, advance 4, and the niche with 3 Brigade was to do that advanced force operation to de-risk a services protect, normal sort of traditional, the doctrines there, and regiment was reclaiming that space and participating in the collective training that they hadn't been doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that manifested in my freefall story that I'll come back to. So Muppet Fortune, high-speed Mal. I had by this stage about 300 jumps logged, which is quite a lot, but not many. I'm a novice in the world of freefall, but back then in the military sense, I had quite a few. I had hundreds of jumps. So I was competent team leader, and we were building our competency, albeit the air package and the whole comms, it was a bit modest, but it was early days of the building blocks.
Mm-hmm.
And we, in Thailand, ran a called a foreign DZ insurgent, and all the patrols, one strobe on the ground, orientate, come in at night, on brakes, and land as a team. And I jumped behind the teams and landed, and was offset. We'd taken it to that level where I had some confidence that the freefall capability was a thing.
Mm-hmm.
It had to be integrated, but it wasn't just. Some of the mission profiles were not realistic, and there was lots of questions being asked that we'll come to later around that force projection mindset. Was that the way we need to structure, or were we more being packaged to do the on-the-mission tasks versus the projection skills that were all the way we were training mainly? So a lot in that. I then went on CT with Jeff, land CT, very demanding but really robust year of regimental skills. A lot of work with the aviators. We did, and I'll come back to, it was the year before Black Hawk, or 2 years before Black Hawk.
So you're a captain at this point?
Yeah,
is that
troop
right?
commander. Yep. And I'm just getting marshal troop command time. I got a troop of 20. I then did CT cycle again. Was selected to be the land CT troop commander.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff took 3 troops in water. A sniper troop. Pete Timmy re-established a sniper troop. Snipers used to be sort of an element within the land troop. They created their own troop. So we were structuring towards Op Gold. Mm-hmm. In many ways, of building that SRO capability, the offensive offset fire support, and we're exploring the image capture and transfer, and the SR, niche SR. That's where the snipers went.
Mm-hmm.
Being SR, being niche, being that sort of clandestine, deep clandestine special reconnaissance in an urban setting, which other agencies do, and that's become a trade craft. But that's my memory. And then at the end of '94, being selected to lead the training team to go to the Philippines for a month and run counter-hijack training on behalf of a DFAT-led IP div mission. Stayed in Manila, CT training with the aviation security police. It was literally, check your guns and drugs in here. The guys were trying to fleece all our brass. So, it was corruption, but we was tolerated to the extent that and it was very politically charged. We weren't allowed to run military training with the Philippine National Army. We were training the counter-hijack police because that was a threat to Australia because of our commercial relationship with Qantas. But it was fascinating as a young captain to take a contingent away and do all the liaison with DFAT and through IP div. It was a learning journey. So gifted in many ways, blessed. Then senior instructor battle wing, 95, running all the internal CT and reinforcement training. So being on the other end of selection, 95 Rio's. There's some famous names now in the regiment, Darren Mortimer and other, sadly Blaine Diddams, KIA, MG, Posthumous. Those 1RR guys came through when I was there, SI battle. So I've got this wonderful window into the 1RR dudes coming through who are all Somalia vets now. Downrange time that most of the regiment didn't have. Fascinating part of the maturity of the unit as a warfighting organisation, a culture within that. So, and then I was very lucky to be posted to the States in '96 for 1 year. I was going towards the parachuting stream. I've been told I wasn't likely to be competitive for staff college, even though I thought I was serving pretty effectively. the regiment was not the place to go in your career. And I was being told that by the career advisor. Even though I was reporting solidly and I was working with Jeff Singerman and, doing some serious workup into AC joint stuff. Yeah, as far as docking was concerned, I was, not competitive for Staff College. Told that. So I chose to specialise down that. What had been a parachuting it was paid for by Training Command, and every offset year was an SAS candidate who did the sort of specialist SAS parachuting, advanced freefall type of stuff. And the other year was the PDS deep parachuting year. And so the year in the States was pick your own adventure, living at Fort Bragg, and the liaison officer, Lieutenant Colonel, who we had designed my program, and the Special Forces commander, I'd been gifted sort of the recovery exploration. So I had a wonderful year living in the States. Fascinating career-wise. I did a US Halo Jump Master course. So you become a US free, and you do one jump at the end. But you have to do, they call the parachute jump master inspection, is this brutal go, no-go gate 10 days into the course, where half the course has been. 2/3 of the course routinely is sent home. That's the way it's run in the States.
Wow.
Because the PJMFF in the US is like this gold seal of like some sort of special club, right? So I was lucky enough to fumble my way through the gate and got the other end of it. So because I was a Jewish, I could offer some value. And I was an international military student, so sponsored under this weird arrangement where these civilian ladies could cut me orders. Literally cut orders that would enable my liaison officer to furnish orders to the US. And if you knew the US bureaucracy, you turn up with orders, they were like, "Hey, happy days, welcome aboard." So it was a wonderful year. I did exchange with the LA Sheriff's Police Department, some ride-alongs, arrests in South Central LA. I'm like, what the hell am I doing here? It was weird. And then the highlight, without question, I did some time with the US Special Forces 2nd Battalion at SWIC, the Special Forces Advanced Training. So inside the Army Green Beret Special Forces, they do entry, then they do specialist training with what they called there. And they had 3 Advanced Force theatre response companies, one in Okinawa, one down in South America, one in Germany. I'll come back to the Stuttgart company, had a 10th group. And they were theatre response before the National Mission Force had arrived, CAG, Delta, out of Bragg. And the Green Berets held that theatre response. Okinawa, and they did this, what they called their CT, their CQB course equivalent, it's called SAFATEC. Long guns, open 270 ranges, some serious shooting on the move, big Berettas, big serious hitters. These big boys run around shooting serious CQB shit. And I was with the instructor team. So I was like, this Aussie guy, hosted by the boss of that team.
Yep.
He was my sponsor.
Yeah, right.
He was a legend. He'd come out of Japan as the OC of that. So he was like there, and I'm like on this ride, and just to go down, and I stayed on the course, and they were tough on these guys, and they'd come in, and I built relationships with them that I later was able to explore in the year. So I had that backstory, did my Jump Master Freefall, and then Dave Lewis, the LO, cracked the code, and I had previously we'd had patchy relationships with through JSOC and into CAG or Combat Applications Group or USF Delta, USF ODD Delta Special, Delta Ranger, and I got access and was integrated into the then C Squadron, which was the squadron that had been at Mogadishu and Black Hawk Down 2 years later. This is 96. I spent 2 months with them, embedded in a team in one of their assault troops. So it was a fascinating window into the grown-up, Tier 1, real-world special forces, and I was lucky enough to somehow fumble my way into. Early on in my trip there, they'd run this big squadron activity, a squadron deliberate set of orders to do an air assault onto a domestic CT, like a hostage recovery, a 747 aircraft on an airfield in somewhere within range, and we had the 160th on board. We had the whole package deal. For some reason the troop commander wasn't around. You want to give the orders? I'm like, yeah, happy days. How hard it can be. Squadron DA, I've done that plenty of times. So I probably bit off more than I could chew. Found myself dog. All of a sudden this thing became a bit of a deal, right? And I realised, oh my God, I'm in the middle of this. And a couple of times they offered to bail me out, right? The NCO's like, you really want to do this guy? Yeah, we sort of own this shit, and, this could get ugly, Then I found out the commanding officer of the CAG's attending orders, and this is going to be a thing, right? Okay, I'm in. So, pitched the orders, not that hard really, The details given by the NCOs, and I remembered that lesson, and I got off the stage early. And all the difficult stuff with all the complex team stuff, that's the NCOs. And they know, he's talking, hey. And I just sat there and nodded and smiled and talked in an Aussie accent. Yeah, you should be right, boss, Norris. So we get in there and I find myself on board, and we did this. So I had 2 months inside the assault team, learn a lot. And it was the top of my martial soldiering. They were working up to go on their Aztec to be the online for their recovery. I stepped aside then, and I had other things planned. I was planning to go back to first group and do an exercise in Korea, which was our regional link with first group. We do the Pacific. Sadly, my father died. I returned to Australia. When I went back to the States following his funeral, the career option wasn't there. To his eternal great credit, Dave Lewis said, "What do you want to do?" My LO in at Bragg, the Lieutenant Colonel, he said, I said, well, so I want to go to Bosnia, because at that stage, Bosnia was at the back end of the I-4 mission, and the US Special Forces were deployed, and the 10th Group forward deployed team in Stuttgart was the 10th Group was based in Colorado. They had a forward deployed element who I knew. Orders cut, Colorado, tip my hat to the boss, find myself in Germany, Stuttgart. All of a sudden I'm downrange and I fly into Sarajevo. Oh my God, it's happening. And I'm with a liaison control element, go to Tuzla. 10th Group guys, you're assigned to this L&O team. I'm walking around having an out-of-body experience. I'm on operations. Finally cracked it.
Because that's your first deployment, isn't it?
Well, really, real well 1 year. Looking back, I don't. But this was sort of downrange, badged up. United States of Australia. I'm in US Woodland Pattern.
Yeah.
Because I'm them, right? US ID. But I've got my flag on. I know who the hell I am. And Dave, I don't know how he did the third country. Not sure if he did. Just to go down. And that's what I admired about him. Because I'm sure they played a bit of catch-up at home. Because then I'm in Bosnia. And I get assigned to the US Liaison Control Element, four-man, a small team, and we're assigned... Tuzla's on the Bosnian side of the zone of separation. The other side's the Republic of Srpska, a place called Uglavik, where the Russian Airborne Brigade are garrisoned. We're assigned to that liaison element. So I go to Uglavik with this E7, E8 maybe.
So sorry, Dan, we were just interrupted, and so you've just got boots on the ground in Bosnia.
Thanks, mate. So I'm having a bit of the outer body. I think is where we were just finishing. I end up in the liaison control element in a place called Uglavik, which is on the Republic of Srpska side of the zone of separation, and I'm watching the Russian Airborne Brigade in the blue and white striped T-shirts doing static drill and visiting liaison officers and having a Slivovitz, which is plum brandy, and they love to have offal because they know the Muslims didn't like offal. So you'd have a beer buzz on by 10 o'clock, and but it was also confronting, visiting some refugee camps, and it was like, some of those death houses, rape houses, really some evil. You just knew those places were evil, and just some serious driving around to and from Hungary, and it was a window into a very dark and my first taste of what real evil and conflict looked like up close and personal. It was only a short deployment. I was lucky to be. I was then going to get home for Christmas. We're home back to the States, and then we packed up and I came back to Aussie. So the Bosnia trip, was that first real boots on the ground sense of it, and a wonderful experience. And the story of that is I went to a Russian Special Forces dining in night, and a true story. It was a representational gig. It happened monthly, and these guys drew straws. The Americans knew what was coming, and I pulled the fine cards. I'm a fine card Aussie driver, because that was a brutal drinking session, and someone had to take the pain for the team.
Mm-hmm.
It was designated, and the team commander said, I'm up. I said, I'm driving. So it was at Humvees. It's a 20k drive through the Balkan Mountains to cross the zone to the venue. We had to be there. All pulled up, you know. So we get there to the dining night. Our team leader, I can't think of his name. He's like, I'm up for it. I'm going hard. Yeah, I'll take one. And he had his wingman, and the other two were drivers. Three of us were drivers and carrying the guy out. So we get to the dining night. You go into a tent. It's all set up, it's all set up. You go into a big tent, like several tables, seating arrangements, big hollow U. Starts with toast. First, before you sit down, toast. And it's, think of a sort of a tumbler glass, 7-ounce glass of water size, of vodka. Vodka. And food on the table, all set. It's all set. Like, salads and weird sort of offal and food.
Mm-hmm.
Standing up, toast, and whammo. And you take a decent swig of the vodka. Sit down. And then the tempo commences. And about every 10 minutes, in between, yada, 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 bang, 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 some other officer stands up, says something in Russian, very officious. And, you know, within about an hour, mate, it just disintegrated into this piss wreck of a fucking wonderful night. And I'm trying to... And I'm sitting opposite, I've got the photo of this guy, and he was straight out of Central Casting. Spetsnaz, I've got the beret, I swapped my beret, my SAS beret. I've got a Russian Spetsnaz beret. At home, I'll show it to you later.
Yeah.
So you can prove me right. And this guy was like the size, he had the head the size of a house. He was this gigantic man. And he was on the team commander. And he was his... And I was watching this guy get destroyed.
What a story!
And I'm drinking like beer buzz, so I'm just sipping vodka. So I'm getting the buzz on, and then the seventh toast is silent. One of them's silent. Stand up. It's obviously a dead man.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, shut up, Dan. Before this guy looked at me, was going to pluck my head off. No shit, mate. There was no end to it. The toast just stopped. At some point, they stopped, and just there was no end. There was no conclusion. There was no further formalities.
Yep.
It just got to the point where everyone's so pissed. It just disintegrated. And so we carted this poor bastard out, mate. Literally. We carried him.
Oh.
We bailed out of this pit. I've got photos. I think somewhere, yeah. And I've got the arm. I'm smoking. I don't smoke. I got Darry man. And I'm the driver.
Oh, wow.
And poor bastard. So we got home. So that's my memory of it.
Yeah, right.
Russian dining night. And started very formal, very officious, and it just disintegrated. And these guys are whacking vodka in, and and this Russian wouldn't let him go, mate. And he's like, he's like plucking him around. He's like, had him as his trophy. and you're watching this happen. And I'm
Am I here? Is this real? Like,
yeah, no, I think of it. Right
yeah.
now, in the moment.
Yeah.
You know, I've got, and living in Uglavik, it was a nuclear power plant at Uglavik.
Mm.
It was eastern Serbia. But the Republic of Srpska, and we got to the bridge where the river was Serbia, and I never went to Serbia. I went to like the border. That was like really Serbia.
Yeah.
So it was a grown-up world. Got a NATO medal. So my first NATO experience was in Bosnia, not in Afghanistan under ISAF-SOF, which I became later. I was a NATO commander and attended a memorial at NATO headquarters, NATO SOF, and was right into that space.
Yeah, right.
But early service was in Bosnia, yeah.
So you mentioned that year that your dad passed away, that would have been a very hard on you, as it is to lose any family member or friends. But you also had, in that year, 96, the regiment lost its greatest loss.
Yeah, look, the Black Hawk, thanks for that, mate. Yeah, it was a tough time, and I was in the UK when I heard the news of 12th of June. A very difficult time. Having my backstory, particularly 94, where we ran SRO mission profiles and ran a HAF, a Helo Assault Force SRO from Tyndall to Melville Island. Now, Tyndall Air Base to Melville Island is a fairly decent long leg. We did a hot FARP out of the back of deployed C-130s. Jeff Singer was a master. He pulled this thing together well ahead of its time. I don't know if they could do it tomorrow, but we did it then, mate. True story. And I roped on to Melville Island, getting on the aircraft in Tyndall, That's what happened.
Yeah, right.
So from that baseline, then when I was SI Rio, and my last formal engagement with the Regiment 95 before I posted out was to run the CT, internal CT. So by that stage, the op cycle had evolved, as we said. So the squadron still had some skills to work up in individual training to get the competencies and the supervisors. So I was the SI battle wing, so we ran the CQB courses and the CQB supervisors courses. So all the reinforcements of one squadron who were killed, we ran them through their Rio cycle. It was devastating. It was devastating. And others will talk about that. My personal experience, Miran Avadizian was my Charlie. When I say my Charlie, in 94 he was our Alpha Charlie. That's the assault troop communicator. So Beret Chook, but a communicator, comms expert, but also an operator hitter. And Avi was a champion, bloody legend. Just humble, polite, kind, gentle bloke, but warrior. And, I get emotional thinking about him because he was killed in 96 because he backed up again because he was a Beret Chook and there weren't many of them. And the assault troops didn't want Muppets. So these guys were the special warriors, really. I'll give credit to the Chooks. We've just seen a kangaroo jump across the Warmore. Look at that. How cool is that?
Wow, how good is this?
How good's that? That's a bit of special moment. Hey, buddy.
Hey, buddy. How you doing, mate?
So we're talking about Avi. There's Avi's spirit right there.
Right,
Look at that. How cool's that?
That is.
So I think about Avi, and I think about that, and that's what he stands for, mate, because that's what... So the Black Hawk was devastating, and that's my personal experience.
He's a true Aussie.
There you go, mate. True Aussie legend.
True Aussie legend.
We're both looking at this ruse jumping into the courtyard of the garden.
This is
probably
unbelievable.
a good point to stop there before I get too choked up. But the Black Hawk was big, mate.
Yeah.
And subsequently, we're about to June, 2 weeks away now, and I've then through the tag, and we'll talk about subsequent accidents up in high range when I was OC tag. Where we lost a SEAL. He wasn't killed, but he was devastatingly injured. And it's a high-risk business, aviation. And I've got huge admiration for the aviators who do it. But 96, that was extremely difficult. And being in the UK probably insulated me from some trauma that it was really difficult to get your head around. I played in the Aussie Rules game in Reggie Week. I also played on... Oh God, I hate to say, I can't think of his name. One of the corporals who was killed. He toweled me up, never got near the ball, beat me up, pushed me around, and he just pushed me around and ended up gave up. He was kind to me and just let me get a kick now and then, and he was killed too. So there's really legend operators killed.
I think, mate, it's a great part to. We'll pull up in part one. Yeah. So we've done part one of your career and. Then we'll get into the next phase of your career and
OC and beyond.
Yeah, and we'll,
Afghan.
Yeah, and Afghan. Yeah, and then what you're currently doing today. So I think, mate, thank you for your time today, and we'll pick up part two in coming weeks, mate. So thank you very much.
Cheers, buddy.
Welcome, loyal listeners of True Blue Conversations. Today's episode is proudly sponsored by Australian Warfighter Coffee. Veteran owned and run, driven by a simple yet powerful motto, people over profit. Every dollar goes towards supporting veterans and first responder charity groups. Head on over to AustralianWarfighters.com and use the code TRUEBLUE for your exclusive discount. Because let's face it, any other coffee is just brown sadness water. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of True Blue Conversations with your host, Adam Bloom. See you on the front line.